Greetings, brethren. This is Providence, your sister in Yahuah HaMashiach, and today I would like to bring to you a presentation on the American solar eclipse that took place on August 21st, 2017. I know this is November, but after much tugging in my spirit by the Ruach HaKodesh, or the Holy Spirit, I decided to just go ahead and upload this YouTube. Brethren, this eclipse has ushered in a new age that this country is in, or to put it more bluntly, this eclipse signaled that America is under Yah's righteous judgment, and I hope the information that I present forth will explain why. We have to be careful to not explain away the events that took place on August 21st of 2017 as a mere scientific event, or even worse, the devices of men. So this is my first YouTube, so please bear with me. And without much further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so when the eclipse occurred, I asked myself, what does your word have to say about this eclipse? So right there in Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, it states, "Then Yah said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." And if you keep reading further down, you'll learn that the lights in the expanse of the heavens are referring to the sun and the moon and the stars. So now, according to verse 14, the sun, the moon, and the stars are for A, signs, and B, seasons. I'm including days and years under seasons, and you'll see in a minute why. Now, while there is some overlap between signs and seasons, there's a significant difference. Well, what's a season? A season is basically Yah's calendar. From sundown to sundown constitutes a new day. From new moon to new moon constitutes a month. And so many new moons constitutes a year. And then the cycle just repeats itself. So seasons denote time, okay? A linear calendar, Yah's calendar, all right? Yah's calendar is based on the sun and the moon and the stars. Now, what about a sign? All right. A sign is different because it doesn't denote time. It's not on a seasonal recurring basis. A sign is a standalone event in and of itself. According to the concordance, a sign signals something. It's a distinguishing banner, a distinguishing mark, a banner, a remembrance, an omen, a warning of something, a token, a miracle. Signs always point to a particular event. Probably one of the more significant signs that occurred in the Bible was the sign of Jonah, spoken of in Matthew 12:39. The sign of Jonah encompassed two things. The first was that just as Jonah was in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall be the Son of Man, in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, and he shall rise again. That's one part of the sign of Jonah. And in the next slide, we're going to go into more detail as to the second part of that sign, which was a sign from the sun. One can't help but draw parallels on how the Pharisees reduced the works of Yeshua and the works of the Holy Spirit to demonic activity. And I've observed much of what we see today with a lot of our well-respected Hebrew leaders and teachers, unfortunately, like the Pharisees, have reduced what we witnessed in the heavens on the 21st of August by the sun and the moon to demonic activity. Or in some cases, the works of NASA or Project Bluebeam or the Illuminati or whatever, basically anything but what the Bible says, because Yah told us in his word in Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, 15, and 16, that the sun, the moon, and the stars are given for signs, so that anytime we see something unusual taking place, with the heavenly bodies, something outside of seasons, something outside of a calendar, something outside of the rising and setting every day, something outside of the moon appearing at night. Sometimes you see it appearing in the day, all right? But something outside of the usual normal activity of the heavenly bodies has to be a sign. Okay, and what we saw on the 21st was a significant event that occurred from the third heaven, from Yah himself, and not from man. So I'm very disappointed when I see our Hebrew leaders and our teachers. These are people that I respect, but I'm kind of disappointed when I see them not attributing signs from the heavens to the rightful author, okay? Because everything in the heavens bears Yah's signature, okay? It's not the work of man, all right? So anyway, I just wanted to encourage the brethren to keep their spiritual eyes open. All right. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Look at what thus saith Yahuah. Look in the word. Okay. Yeshua told us in so many words that we should always be sober and be vigilant. Okay. And we should be watchful and we should be prayerful. We should be able to discern the signs of the times. We're going to start witnessing a lot of these types of signs. There's going to be another solar eclipse here 7 years from now in the year 2024. So we need to start having our spiritual eyes opened and being able to discern signs of the times. On this slide, I've listed just a handful of scripts that shows how Yah has used his signs according to Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. And so I'm not going to read all of these. There's at least 10 scripts. So I've listed them for your own reference and for your own research purposes. However, as we go through each of these, at least on a very high level, I just wanted to point out a particular pattern that I've noticed in how heavenly bodies are used for signs in the scripts. Now, starting with Isaiah chapter 13, verse 10, it reads, "For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine." Brethren, anytime you see language like the sun being darkened or the moon not giving its light, it's talking about solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. If you read the entire Isaiah chapter 13, you'll realize that it's talking about the judgment of Babylon. In fact, the entire book of Isaiah prophesies against all the nations that have risen up against Israel. So Isaiah chapter 13 is specifically talking about Yah's judgment towards the nation of Babylon, the empire, the kingdom of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. There's some dual prophecy going on in there too. It's also talking about the great day of Yahuah, which actually is talking about end times. So there's some dual prophecy going on, but what's the point? The point here is that verse 10 is showing us, among others, some signs that Yah is giving himself to signal, to herald, to announce judgment. Let's turn over to the book of Joel. This book has to be one of my favorites. It's a short, concise book on the battle at Armageddon and Yah's ensuing judgment when he gathers these nations that have cast lots for Israel and sold little Israelite boys for harlots and little Israelite girls for wine that they might drink. This is the great day of Yahuah. And there's going to be all kinds of miracle signs and wonders that's going to take place in the heavens that will accompany this great day, to include what we see written here in Joel chapter 2, verse 30 through 31, and Joel chapter 3, verse 15. It reads, "The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood." So I don't know if you're seeing a pattern here, but I certainly do. Now I have to read the book of Amos, chapter 8, verse 9, and it reads, "And it shall come to pass in that day, saith Yahuah Elohim, that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in the clear day." Now go ahead and read that entire chapter 8 in its proper context. It's a precept to the book of Luke, chapter 23, verse 44. Now, in this chapter, Yeshua is on the cross. He's being crucified. Okay, and verse 44 reads, "And it was about the 6th hour, and there was a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. Now, the sixth hour is 12 p.m., what we call 12 p.m. in this Roman time calendar. From 12 noon to the ninth hour, which is 3 p.m., so from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m., when the sun, it is at its peak and it is at its brightest in the sky, that Yahuah caused a darkness to take place over the entire earth. From 12 p.m. until 3 p.m., there was darkness witnessed by everyone on the planet at that time. I don't know if you all are beginning to notice a pattern here, but this goes back to the sign of Jonah. The first part of that sign was, as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so was the Son of Man in the belly of the earth and will be resurrected. Well, this also occurred according to Amos chapter 8, verse 9, and we see a precept to that in Luke chapter 23, verse 44. This was the second part of that sign. This was a solar eclipse that took place while Yeshua was on the cross from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. And speaking of the sign of Jonah, we all know the story. In Jonah chapter 3, verse 4, we see Jonah issuing a warning to the Ninevites that in 40 days, Nineveh will be overthrown. The Bible goes on to say that the people, all the way from the king down to the annals, went ahead and fasted, put on sackcloth. But the Bible doesn't go into detail as to why the Ninevites were so keen to repent. Based on ancient Assyrian cuneiform tablets, there was a solar eclipse that took place shortly before Jonah issued this warning. There was an eclipse called the Bar Sagali eclipse. I'm going to include a link in the description box for further reference, but there was a very significant eclipse that took place called the Bar Sagali eclipse that occurred on 15 June 763 BC. So this just goes to show that the ancients knew to take signs from the heavens seriously, unlike now where we're taught that such signs are simply natural scientific events, when that's just not the case. These are biblical events. These are more than just scientific, naturally occurring events. Second Esdras is a great book. It's an end-time book, which makes a great companion to the book of Revelations. And chapter 5 of Second Esdras begins with the mention of tokens. Tokens is another word for signs. So chapter 5 begins with the mention of tokens accompanying the end times. So as Second Esdras chapter 5 verse 4 reads, "If the Almighty grant you to live, you shall see after the third shofar, or the third trump, that the sun shall suddenly shine again in the night, and the moon thrice in the day." So guys, these are some crazy signs that's happening. Again, we're seeing signs from the heavens to point out what? We're seeing more judgment. We're seeing more omens. We're seeing more warning, especially as it relates to the nearing of the great day of Yahuah. So basically, brethren, I believe you're beginning to see the same pattern that I'm seeing. I'm not going to read Matthew chapter 24, Mark 13, or Luke 21. All of these are basically Yeshua's response to his disciples when they asked him, Lord, when will be the sign of thy coming, or the sign of the end of the world? And so all of these is Yeshua's response to these questions. And of course, there's many signs that's going to accompany Yeshua's return. But one very important sign, and we saw that sign occur on the 21st of August, was signs in the heavens, the sun being darkened, the moon not giving its light, the stars falling from heaven, the powers of heaven being shaken. Okay, these are all very, very, very significant, powerful signs. And I don't think that we should take what we saw on the 21st as just chalk it up to some normal scientific event, or Project Bluebeam and NASA and Illuminati activity. That's just nonsense. These were biblical signs. And it's a sign for America because it was basically a sign that was witnessed by every American on the continental United States. So this is a sign, this is a signal for something for this country. So let's talk about the Great American Solar Eclipse. As you can see, there are 3 different types of eclipses. There's a partial eclipse where the moon only partially covers the light from the sun. There's an annular eclipse where the moon is too far to completely cover the light from the sun. What occurred on the 21st of August was a total solar eclipse where the moon completely covered the light from the sun, casting a shadow on Earth, making it almost as dark as night in certain parts of America. And this is also known as the path of totality. Now, while I will say that eclipses are not exceptionally rare events throughout the world, this eclipse was the first total solar eclipse since 1776. Which solely made landfall in the US. Now, there was another total solar eclipse that took place back in 1918. So this country has seen, only 2 total solar eclipses in the past 300 plus years. But that's still quite rare. And the one in 1918, it did cover coast to coast. However, other countries, it touched Japan and a few other countries as well on its way to the United States, starting from the West Coast. However, the one that occurred on the 21st hasn't happened since 1776, solely making landfall in the United States of America. That's pretty significant. And as all of you probably know, there was a significant event that took place in this country in 1776. And that was when this country was dedicated to Hashatan. So that's something to take a look at. And if you look at the path of totality, you'll see that it starts in Salem, Oregon, on the West Coast, and ends in Charleston, South Carolina, which lies on the 33-degree parallel. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but I thought it was worth pointing out. Excuse me. And I thought it was also very interesting that the path of totality covered the Cascadia fault line, which touches the San Andreas fault line on the West Coast. And it also went over Yellowstone, supervolcano Yellowstone, which is trembling and quaking. It also went across the New Madrid fault line, which runs in the smack dab center of the country. So it's just interesting looking at the path of totality and how it seemingly divides the country in half. All right, I wanted us to turn our attention to a connection between the eclipse that occurred on the 21st of August of 2017 and one particular eclipse that occurred on the continent of Africa. And that is a total solar eclipse that occurred here, as you can see on this map, in 1619 starting from the west coast of Africa, ending well off of the east coast of Africa to Madagascar. The African eclipse of 1619 began on the western coast of Africa in modern-day Gabon through Central Africa and exiting off of the eastern coast of Africa through the countries of Mozambique and Madagascar. As you can see from this green marker over here, the greatest eclipse occurred over modern country of Democratic Republic of Congo. And the greatest eclipse is virtually identical to the greatest magnitude of alignment and the greatest duration. In other words, this is the spot where the effects of the eclipse is greatest and longest and darkest. So what exactly was taking place in this region of Africa in 1619? Well, the Portuguese were making incursions into what was then known as the Kingdom of Congo and had captured their first batch of enslaved Africans sailbound towards North America. This wasn't without a fight, however. The formidable Queen Nzinga became famous and world-renowned as a warrior queen when she resisted the Portuguese insatiable appetite for African slaves. And as you can see, this is the lovely Queen Nzinga right here. And all of this was taking place in 1619 when the African eclipse occurred right over the Kingdom of Congo. This eclipse was a particularly long eclipse, topping out at 6 minutes and 41 seconds. Most eclipses fall between the 2-minute to 5-minute range. For instance, the Great American Eclipse of 2017 topped out at only 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And the region where this eclipse occurred took place in a kingdom where the Portuguese were enslaving Africans from the Kingdom of Congo, and they eventually were brought to Jamestown. We've all heard about Jamestown, Virginia, being the first city in America to have slaves. Well, this is exactly where they came from. 40 days after the African solar eclipse of 1619 arrived the first enslaved Africans onto the North American continent. Now, there were enslaved Africans who were brought into the Caribbean and brought into South America, but Jamestown, Virginia saw the first enslaved Africans on American soil, and Kingdom of Congo is exactly where they came from, where there was an eclipse that occurred just 40 days prior. So 40 days in scripture represents trials, tribulation, and testing. It's a very significant number. And remember, in 40 days, the city of Nineveh was supposed to be overthrown according to Jonah's proclamation in the book of Jonah, chapter 3, verse 4. So remember, 40 days is when Moses fasted on Mount Sinai. 40 days is when Yeshua HaMashiach was led into the wilderness to fast. So 40 days is a very, very significant number. And guys, this is not a coincidence. We shouldn't take it lightly. As believers in the word, we know that nothing is left to chance and circumstance. 40 days after the great African eclipse were the first enslaved Africans brought to the shores of North America in Jamestown, Virginia. Guys, this is very, very deep. Okay, and this fulfills partially Deuteronomy 28. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, it says, "And Yahuah shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you." This is directly speaking to enslaved Africans, particularly those along West Africa, Central Africa, and along the Eastern African seaboard, actually by the Arab slave traders 500 years prior to all of this, around 1000 AD. But I'm not going to spend any time on the Arab slave trade just yet. That's an entirely separate presentation. I'm focusing solely on the information that is right in front of me, which is the African eclipse of 1619. And I'm sure if I dug deeper, oh my goodness, I would find so much more. If any of us dug any deeper, we would find so much more. There would be so much more revealed. But, you know, we don't have all day. So I'm just going to try to keep it limited to the information that's been set forth. The name of the slave ship that was used to bring the enslaved people of Congo was named White Lion, and these were Hebrews that were brought from Central Africa, from the Kingdom of Congo. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, these were Hebrews in accordance to the scriptures, in accordance to the prophecies as outlined in the Bible, particularly in the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Leviticus. And throughout the Bible, these men and women from Africa were the enslaved Hebrews brought to the shores of America and throughout the Americas, and quite frankly, throughout the world. And I get it, guys. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, my ancestors were enslaved too. The Irish were enslaved by the Barbary of North Africa, and the British were enslaved by the Moors, and oh, the Native Americans were enslaved by the British. To an extent, that is very much true. But brethren, if we're going to be 100% completely honest, the Bible doesn't speak to this slave trade of the Irish, and it doesn't speak to the slave trade of the Europeans along the North African coast. It just doesn't. The Bible calls the slave trade of the Hebrews Jacob's trouble. It labels the affliction of Jacob and his seed, his direct lineage, his bloodline descendants, okay, the bloodline descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This affliction has a name. It's called Jacob's trouble. It's outlined throughout the Bible. The Hebrews were enslaved in the book of Genesis. They were in captivity in their own land in the book of Revelation, okay, throughout the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, and in all the other books and histories in between. The Hebrews were always in one form of bondage, servitude, slavery, or captivity. And ladies and gentlemen, that has not changed. Okay, that has not changed. I don't see the Irish slave trade in the Bible. Am I saying that it didn't happen? Absolutely not. I'm not saying it didn't happen. Of course it happened. I've researched all of this. Anybody can research the Irish slave trade and see that Europeans indeed were enslaved in Northern Africa. That's why Northern Africa looks the way it does now. That's why the people of Northern Africa are very, very, very much mixed, a very mixed looking people, because they have interbred and intermixed with Europeans for many, many, many generations, all right, through trade and through war and through the Moorish conquest, and then, of course, through the Barbary slave trade and through colonialization. With the British and the French very recently. So there's no denial that has been a slave trade of European peoples, okay? But that's not what's discussed in the Bible, okay? And that's what we're focusing on, the prophecies and the curses attributed to a particular group of people. The Bible doesn't speak on every people, not in that way, especially not as it relates to the curses. So I just want to make sure I made that crystal clear. These curses fit one particular group of people. The Bible says that this is going to be a sign as to who the true Israelites are, who the true descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are, who the true chosen of people of God are. It's all outlined in Deuteronomy 28 as well as Leviticus 26 and other scriptures. But read Deuteronomy 28 with open eyes and with open understanding, and you'll realize it's not talking about the Barbary slave trade. It's talking about the transatlantic slave trade, even the Arab slave trade. Okay? So I just wanted to make that clear. 7 years from now, in the year 2024, there will be a second total solar eclipse that's going to go across the United States of America. It's going to start here on the southern portion of Mexico and move across the entire United States and empty out of Canada. And as we mentioned in the previous slides and discussed the frequency of total solar eclipses and how at any given point anywhere in the world, total solar eclipses occur anywhere along the lines of once every 20 years, 25 years. Given this frequency of total solar eclipses, for another total solar eclipse to take place over the continental United States in 7 years, from 2017, and another one occurring in 2024, this makes this eclipse a highly unusual event. Total solar eclipses don't occur that frequently. And when they do, they certainly don't occur over the same landmass in 7 years. This is just a highly unusual event, even by NASA standards. What is interesting about this second solar eclipse is that when you look at the first one, which occurred in 2017, or the one that we're discussing right now, and the future one that's going to occur in 7 years, that's another highly prophetic number. I'm not going to go into it right now, but in 7 years, the second total solar eclipse is going to basically cross paths with the with the 2017 eclipse, making a big X in, I guess you would say, Middle America. It's going to make a big X over the state of Illinois, where the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers meet. Now, what's interesting about the Mississippi River is that it is the largest river system in this country and the fourth largest in the world after the Nile, the Amazon, and the Yangtze, respectively, with the Ohio River being one of its major tributaries. So that's where this X is right here. And it's basically going to make an X over southern Illinois in a town called Carbondale. Carbondale, Illinois is also known as Little Egypt. Okay. It's called Little Egypt for many reasons. First of all, because of the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. And there is a university called Southern Illinois University, which has a mascot called the Saluki. Okay. And I would encourage you to go look up exactly what a Saluki is. A Saluki is an Egyptian bred dog. So that is another interesting point. And just south of Carbondale is another town called Cairo, Illinois. So this part of Illinois for a variety of reasons, is very Egyptian influenced. Just go look up Carbondale, Illinois, and you'll see that these people, the founders, the settlers of that town, they were very much interested in calling it Little Egypt. Because of its resemblance, I suppose, to the Nile Delta region of Egypt. That's what they say. Another interesting thing to consider about the Mississippi River is that it's very similar to the Nile River in that it is a major commercial river system for this country. And geographically, it's similar to the Nile River in that it divides the country. 30% of the country is east of the Mississippi, and 70% of the country is west of the Mississippi. Kind of similar to the Nile River and how it divides the country of Egypt, 70% of the country to the west and 30% to the east. What's interesting also is that the city of Memphis, Tennessee, lies on the Mississippi River. Remember, Memphis is not an English word. It is an Egyptian word. Notice I said Egyptian, not Arab word. Two completely separate, different languages. And then you have sphinxes and obelisks everywhere all over this country. You have the Sphinx in Nevada. You have obelisks all over Washington, D.C. And it's just interesting because a slash is going to be made right over Egyptian influenced areas of this country. It is commonly taught and understood that America is not in the Bible. Others teach that America is in the Bible, but that America is Babylon. Well, I would submit that neither of those teachings are accurate. I would submit that America is Egypt, spiritual Egypt. And I've outlined the following scriptures to prove that to be the case. Starting from Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 through 14, we see the Most High speaking to Abraham, called Abram, in these verses. And it reads, "And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with a great substance." This verse is actually a precept to Acts chapter 7, verses 6 through 7, where the martyr Stephen is making a speech before he gets stoned to death by the wayward Israelites. And it reads, "And Yah spoke on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land, and that they should bring them into bondage, and entreat them evil for 400 years. And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge, said Yah. And after that shall they come forth and serve me in this place." So as we can see here, we read that the ancient Israelites were to be sold into slavery, into bondage for 400 years. I want you to take a note of 400 years, all right? Now, we were always taught that 400 years was the 400-year captivity or slavery of the Israelites in the land of Egypt. Well, I would submit that the 400-year slavery or captivity or bondage that is described in the book of Genesis and the book of Acts is not the slavery that the Israelites endured in ancient Egypt. The bondage that the ancient Israelites endured in ancient Egypt can be read in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verses 40 through 41. And it reads, "Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 400 and what? And 30 years." This is not the same captivity. And continue reading. "And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day it came to pass, that all the hosts of Yahuah went out from the land of Egypt." Now, I don't see 400 years here. This particular captivity that's being spoken of in Exodus chapter 12 is not the same as the captivity spoken in Genesis and the book of Acts. These are two separate captivities. One will last 400 years, another was supposed to last 430 years. The one in Exodus, as we can clearly see, was the one that took place in ancient Egypt. Now, again, I encourage you all, go back and read the entire chapter so you can get the entire context. But the captivity, the bondage and the slavery that's spoken of and prophesied in Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 through 14, is not the same as the bondage, slavery, and captivity spoken of in Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 through 41. The slavery of the ancient Israelites in ancient Egypt is what's spoken of in Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 through 41, not Genesis. The 400-year captivity is not what we've always thought of as the ancient Israelites in Egypt. That was a 430-year captivity as spoken of in Exodus. So what's the 400-year bondage and slavery that was prophesied to Abraham and his descendants in Genesis chapter 15? Well, let's keep moving to Jasher, the book of Jasher, verses, and this is why they took out these lost books. I'm telling you, the book of Jasher, chapter 81, verse 3, and it reads, "And the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in the land of Mizraim, which is Egypt, in hard labor was 210 years. And at the end of the 210 years, Yahuah brought forth the children of Israel from Mizraim with a strong hand." Okay, and if you keep reading down, it continues talking about the mighty exodus of the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. So even though it's saying 210 years here, I believe this is a precept to Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 through 41. And I believe the reason we see 210 years as opposed to 430 years is because there was a sojourning that took place. Initially, you'd have to read some of the lost books. You would have to read Jubilees and Jasher in particular to understand that Israel, when they first went into Egypt as 70 people, okay, which is Jacob and his 12 sons and their children and their wives, when they went into Egypt initially and stayed in Egypt and their children had children and so on for a few generations, they enjoyed Egypt. And as we can see here, for roughly 220 years, thereabout, there was no hard bondage. They were simply sojourning and enjoying Egypt. The affliction of Egypt, as it states here in Jasher chapter 81, verse 3, it specifically says that the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in the land of Mizraim in hard labor was 210 years. So this is just my opinion. I don't believe the scriptures are lying. I believe that for the first 220 years or so, the ancient Israelites enjoyed the land. They enjoyed Egypt. They enjoyed their neighbors, and their neighbors enjoyed them, or at least endured them for those first couple of hundred years. But in the latter part of those 430 years, which would remain another 210 years, was the hard labor. Okay, so right there in the middle of their 430-year sojourning began the affliction. So the first 220 years was simply sojourning, and the last 210 years, according to the book of Exodus, it was a 430-year total stay. So that last 220 years, the Israelites were afflicted and they left great substance. So that's what was going on. That's the affliction, and that's the bondage. That's the 430-year bondage as spoken of in the book of Exodus. So that doesn't answer the question. What about the 400-year captivity as spoken of in the book of Genesis, as prophesied to Father Abraham? Well, all one needs to do is to go to Deuteronomy 28. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the famous Deuteronomy 28, which basically identifies who the ancient Israelites' descendants are. And if you read, I'm not going to read the whole thing, obviously. I'm not going to read 48 through 68, but I will read verse 68 in chapter 28. And it reads, "And Yahuah shall bring thee into" where? Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the scriptures, Egypt is called the house of bondage. The Egypt that is being spoken of in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68, is not modern day or even ancient Israel. It's not a geographical location. The word Egypt here is being used symbolically because it's saying here that Yahuah shall bring the ancient Israelites back into Egypt with ships. The ancient Israelites never had to go into Egypt with ships. They could simply trek across the border into Egypt. Remember, Israel, to this very day, shares a border with Africa. It shares a border with Egypt. They are on the same continental plate. They went back and forth into and out of Egypt with ease, as we can see with the sojourning of Jacob's family into Egypt. There was never any need to go back into Egypt with ships. So this is a very symbolic, metaphorical verse. Verse 68. Yah is saying he's going to send the children of Israel back into the house of bondage by sea in a way that they have never seen before and shall never see it again. And there, wherever this symbolic Egypt is, the children of Israel shall be sold to their enemies for slaves. And nobody is going to redeem them out of their situation. Only by the mighty hand of Yah will he redeem his children. There shall be no Marcus Garvey. There shall be no Malcolm X. There shall be no Martin Luther King. There shall be no black leader or African leader for that matter. The only one who can redeem us, the only one who can redeem his children, the only one that can redeem Israel is Yah himself through Yeshua HaMashiach. Let's look in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 17, verse 4. So here, Jeremiah keeps prophesying to the leaders and to the kings of Judah. And of course, they're not listening. They're stiff-necked and hard-headed. And he's saying here in chapter 17, verse 4, and thou, even thyself, shall discontinue from thine heritage. He's talking about the ancient Israelites here, that I gave thee. And I will cause thee to serve thine enemies, what? In the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn, how long? Forever. Let's look at this verse a little bit more closely. This is Jeremiah speaking, or I should say Yah speaking through Jeremiah. And Yah is trying to tell Israel, look, I am going to cause you guys to discontinue from your heritage that I gave you. What does that mean? Discontinue from your heritage. Yah is telling his people that he is going to cut them off from knowing who they are. That's what it means when you discontinue your heritage. At some point, they are going to cease from knowing who they are as a people. And I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. He's telling Judah hundreds of years in advance that you are going to be cut off from knowing who you are, and you are going to serve your enemies, not in Babylon. This is not Babylon, even though they're about to get judged through Babylon. They're going to be judged even more harshly in a land that they know not. They knew Babylon, okay? Babylon was where Father Abraham came from. He came from Ur of Chaldees, which was in Babylon. They knew Babylon. Babylon is a couple weeks trek from Israel. So they knew Babylon. They knew Egypt. What this verse is saying here, which is a precept to what we read in Deuteronomy 28:68, the Israelites are going to be cut off from their heritage, and they are going to serve their enemies in a land which they know is not. Ladies and gentlemen, I would submit to you that this land which they know is not is the land where they were taken to by ships. And we're going to get to what land that is here pretty soon. Let's move on to 2nd Esdras chapter 15, verses 10 through 12. You have to remember that the prophet Ezra is back in the land of Judah. This is after Jeremiah. This is after Babylon. Okay. The kingdom of Judah has been reestablished because after their 70-year captivity in Babylon, they came back to the land. They came back to Israel and they set up their walls. This is where they were building the walls. This is the book of Nehemiah and all that, right? So they're building the walls. They're in the process of building the temple. They're in the process of basically building back up their kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. All right. So I want you to keep that in mind as we read these two verses here, and they read on this wise. Behold, my people is led as a flock to the slaughter. I will not suffer them now to dwell in the land of Mizraim, Egypt, but I will bring them with a mighty hand and with a stretched out arm and smite Mizraim with plagues as before. And will destroy all the land thereof. Mizraim shall mourn, and the foundation of it shall be smitten with the plague and with the punishment that Elohim shall bring upon it. Brethren, the 430-year captivity of Israel in the land of Mizraim took place a long time ago. That took place in the book of Genesis and Exodus. The Mizraim that's being spoken of in these verses cannot possibly be geographical Egypt. Let's read this again with understanding. It says that I will not suffer my people to dwell in the land of Mizraim. Remember, when Yah is saying this, Judah is already in their land. Ezra is receiving this word from Yah in the land of Judah. The 430-year captivity of Israel in the land of Mizraim took place a long time ago, and they have just come back from Babylon, and they're in the process of setting up their kingdom back in their own land. So this Mizraim cannot possibly be geographical Egypt. Verse 11, but I will bring them with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm and smite Mizraim with plagues. When? As before. So ladies and gentlemen, this is a future Egypt. This is talking about another Egypt because it's saying that he is going to smite Egypt again as he did with the plagues before. This is a prophetic word. This is not geographical Egypt. This is not ancient Egypt. This is not today's Egypt. This is a symbolic future prophetic Egypt. Where is that Egypt? I submit to you that that Egypt is the modern superpower of America. America is not Babylon. America is not Mystery Babylon. Okay, Mystery Babylon is a spiritual institution. It is the Vatican. It is the papacy. It is the Roman Catholic Church. That is Mystery Babylon, the whore of Babylon, with her little harlot churches, harlot false doctrines that has spread all over the world. All right, so let's just get that out of the way. America is not Babylon. It is not Mystery Babylon. Is it a daughter of Babylon? Absolutely. But America is Egypt. According to these scriptures, America, and when I say America, I'm talking about America as a superpower and all the other little territories that fall under it, basically Central and South America. I'm talking about America's influence, okay, regional influence on the Western Hemisphere. That's Mitzrayim, especially this country that we call the United States of America, which was founded on Freemasonry, which is basically white worship of the ancient mystery schools of Egypt. So as we established in the earlier part of this lesson, the first enslaved Hebrews were brought into the Americas in 1619 from the Kingdom of Congo. And the slavery that was prophesied to Father Abraham, and that was mentioned again by Martyr Stephen, a 400-year captivity. Look at the language that's being used about the 400-year captivity. It says they shall be afflicted for 400 years. It says that they should be entreated evil for 400 years, and they shall be brought into bondage, okay, for 400 years. Not necessarily just slavery, but affliction, racism, hatred, chattel slavery. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see that slavery spoken of anywhere else in the Bible. I don't see the European slavery, the Barbary slave trade, and the slavery of other peoples discussed in the Bible. I'm talking about biblically. The Bible is biblically pointing out a specific group of people that this happened to, and that's not the Barbary slave trade. So that captivity began on American soil in 1619, and those 400 years is going to be up in 2019. Well, brethren, I hope I've established, at least on a reasonable level, that America is indeed modern day Egypt. America is not Babylon. America is not Mystery Babylon. If it were, Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 would have read that the Israelites would have gone to Babylon in ships. But it did not say that. It said that Israel would go back into where? Egypt in ships. And we all know that the ancient Israelites did not go into Babylon. And they also did not go into modern day Egypt. They went into a spiritual Egypt. And that Egypt, as I've tried to establish in the past hour, is indeed America. And for all those who claim that America is Babylon, then why would 2 Esdras chapter 15 verses 10 through 12 liken the second exodus of the Israelites to Egypt, to Mitzrayim? Those verses would have mentioned Babylon. If indeed America is Babylon, then those verses in 2 Esdras would have read such. But it does not. It mentions Mitzrayim at least 3 times in those 3 verses. It prophesies the second exodus of Israel coming out of Egypt. Again, not Babylon. And moreover, just from the handful of pictures that I've posted in the latter part of this presentation, it is undeniable that from a historical perspective, this land of America was literally built on Freemasonry, which is, again, the white worship of the ancient African mystery schools of, again, Egypt. In fact, you can look at this very picture that's being displayed on your screen right now. This is a picture of all places, Memphis, Tennessee. You can see here a statue of Ramses the Great and a huge pyramid, which is atypical of Egypt. And again, the founding fathers were worshiping the same deities that the ancient people of Egypt were worshiping, which were basically fallen angels. I know this is going to upset all the Hotep brothers and all the black conscious activists, but it is true. So the so-called founding fathers of this nation basically made a covenant with those same fallen angels and dedicated this country in 1776 to those evil entities, ultimately to Hashatan himself. So I hope I've made my case from a biblical and historical perspective that America is Egypt. And as a result, a sign was sent by Yahuah Elohim, the Most High, to judge this nation accordingly for playing the leading role in the 400-year enslavement, affliction, and captivity of Yah's chosen people, the people of Israel.